Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our State of the Nation webinar. It's great to see so many of you joining us this morning. I'll run through a couple of housekeeping things and then set out how this morning is going to run. I'm Tash, I'm the Policy and Research Lead at SotN. I'll be joined today by Hade Turkman, our research partner, and we'll be joined around 11 o'clock by the Minister for Social Justice as well. Just to say that if you have any technical issues at all today, please drop a message in the chat. The team are there to help where possible. If you have any questions that come to mind at any point during this morning's session, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll be taking questions towards the end of the session. And it'll be of no surprise that we're sharing information about today across our social media channels. I would encourage you all to get involved in the conversation. Please tag us at SotN and use the hashtag SotN. This morning, the session is going to start with just a bit of intro from myself, just to explain what State of the Nation is all about. As I said, we'll be joined by the Minister for Social Justice, Jane Hutt, at 11 a.m. We'll be offering her reflections on this year's findings and the work of Welsh Government to tackle gender inequality. And then Hade is going to take us through the latest findings from this year's reports before we open up the floor for those questions. So to start with, what is State of the Nation? Why do we do it? We've been publishing an annual State of the Nation report since January 2019. The report brings together gender disaggregated statistics so that we can measure our progress towards gender equality in Wales. Now, in Wales, it's fair to say, I think, that there's a long-standing commitment to gender equality from those in positions of power. There are ambitions for a more equal Wales, a prosperous and more resilient Wales, ambitions for Wales to be the safest place to be a woman, and for Wales to have a feminist government. And it's critically important that we're able to measure our progress towards those ambitious goals. And we hope that State of the Nation forms an important part of the evidence base that enables us to do that. Now, this year is our 5th State of the Nation report. So we thought it was the perfect time to do a bit of a sort of longer term reflect back on the data across that time period to see whether or not any trends are emerging that perhaps are not as immediately obvious when we're just looking at the change year on year. The 5-year report looks at the same issues as the annual report and, where possible, tracks the data across the full 5 years, although that's not possible in all cases, unfortunately. Taken together, this year's reports, we think, offer important insights into whether or not we are making progress towards gender equality and whether that progress is happening quickly enough. Now, I think it's important that we do note the context in which we are publishing this year's reports. It's fair to say that when we published our first report in January 2019, we could never have predicted the challenges that we would face over that 5-year period. The pandemic that cost far too many lives put unfathomable pressure on our public services and required restrictions on our day-to-day lives that I think few of us could have imagined back in 2019. As we come to the end of that crisis, we find ourselves in the midst of the cost of living crisis, with the worst inflation that we've seen for over a decade, pushing the cost of basic essentials ever higher while wages stagnate. Now, this crisis, like many before it, is impacting disproportionately on women. We already are seeing that women are going without in order to ensure that their families do not, cutting back on food and other essentials. And we know that this is having an impact on their mental health and will highly likely have an impact on their physical health. The disproportionate impact of this crisis, like many crises that have come before, is not inevitable and is directly related to the inequality that our State of the Nation reports highlight, which you will see as we go through the data today. As I said, the Minister is due to join us at 11 o'clock. So what I might do at this point actually is invite Hade to join us and maybe make a start on some of the findings presentations, and then we'll take a pause while the Minister joins and is able to offer her reflections.
Hi, thank you, Tash. Good morning. I'm Hade. As Tash said, I'm a research partner at Coretech. We worked on the 2 reports this year, and we are going to present from both of the reports, both the annual one and the 5-year reports today. I'm going to share my screen with you right now. Yeah, hope you can all see the screen. Yeah. So state of the nation is very important for us because we can monitor the progress of gender equality in Wales, and our report has 3 main sections centered around Coretech's 3 main strategic priorities: women in the economy, women represented, and women at risk. The report is organized according to these strategic aims, and in this report, we take each of these in turn and share a few key findings from the 5-year and the annual report. We produce, as Tash mentioned, 2 reports this year, reflecting back the 5-year progress, 5-year progress, and the annual progress we saw in Wales. Starting with intersectionality, intersectionality is key in our work. We will not achieve gender equality until all women in Wales are able to enjoy fair and equitable outcomes and live lives free from discrimination and oppression. Looking at the issues in an intersectional way is therefore essential for us. But data can be a challenge in Wales due to small sample sizes in particular, but we are keen to build on the past few years, and we will exploring what further indicators we can include in the state of the nation going forward to further highlight intersectional outcomes. In our State of the Nation reports to date, we looked at the headline. We looked at headline economic indicators by gender, disability, and gender and ethnicity. And looking at the 5-year data from gender and disability perspective, we see that the economic activity rate for disabled women has increased slightly from 51.5% to 53.5%. But this remains lower than disabled men and non-disabled women still. Unemployment has also reduced for disabled women from 8% to 5.5%. Disabled women have lower unemployment rate than disabled men, but a higher unemployment rate than non-disabled men. Looking at gender and ethnicity, since 2018, the proportion of ethnic minority women in employment has increased significantly from 48.2% to 61.4%. This is still lower than ethnic minority men or white women, but is one of the most significant change we saw in the 5-year data. And unemployment rates among ethnic minority women are a little more volatile, with an increase over the past couple of years after an initial decrease. This could be the result of more ethnic minority women moving from economic inactivity to actively seeking employment, but we need to be careful about monitoring these trends and ensure that more ethnic minority women are supported into employment, and that employment gaps between other groups close. Is still a very volatile data we have. And women in the economy is our first section after the coming from the intersectionality. I guess everyone will accept that we are yet to achieve gender equality in the economy. Women still experience barriers that men do not, and our economic system structures and policies continue to recreate and reproduce inequality. And economic inequality between women and men stems from different roles, sectors, occupations, and contract types that women are more likely to be employed in, which in turn is shaped by greater pressure that women often face due to caring responsibilities. These are general backgrounds about the women's employment, but one of the most commonly used measures around economic inequality is the gender pay gap. It's not perfect gender pay gap data, but it only gives a bit of a top line idea about what might be going on in the average income of men and women. And over the past 12 months, the gender pay gap has again closed slightly, and now standing at 11.3% for all workers. But interesting, the gender pay gap among full-time workers only has widened to 6.1% from 4.3%. So there's a bigger gap between the pay gap for the full-time and full-time only workers in our economy. If we look at the gender pay gap across the 5 years, we see that the data for Wales is a little bit more volatile than it is for the UK, but we do generally see a downward trend, and it's slightly lower now than it was in 2018. And we do have a lower, smaller gender pay gap in Wales than the UK has as a whole. Since 2018, there's a general trend downward in the gender pay gap for Wales and the UK, although the figures are a little bit more volatile in Wales compared to the UK. If you look at the economic activity rates for men and women in 2022, we see that there remains a gender gap, with women less likely to be economically active. Across the 5 years of data, this has remained largely consistent. There's a clear COVID impact in the 2021 figures, but overall the gender gap persists, currently standing at 7.5 percentage points. And economic inactivity figures, we know there are issues with the economic inactivity as a measure. First of all, I just want to give a brief definition of what economic activity is. Economic inactivity means one is not in work and not looking for work. So it's different from unemployment. It's not that gives you if you are searching for an employment. It has long been discussed in the feminist economic circles and in the spaces of gender equality, because it provides some indicators of the reasons for being economically inactive, such as health conditions or caring responsibilities. However, this measure does not give any value for the loss of labor power. It just shows the proportion of people who are not in active labor market. It fails to take into account the value of unpaid work. And we know that a lot of unpaid work that women are predominantly doing is absolutely integral to keeping the economy ticking along. So what we are trying to do in the State of the Nation is to look at economic inactivity by reason, so we can demonstrate the impact that those caring responsibilities are having on women's ability to engage in the form of economy. Since 2018, we can see that the proportion of women who are economically inactive due to looking after family or home has reduced slightly to 24.7%. The proportion of men citing this reason has increased by a greater proportion this past year than previously, but the gender gap remains significant, with women 3 times as likely to be economically inactive due to looking after the family or home. I think Minister is with us. I'm just going to stop my my presentation now, and then we can carry on after Minister.
Yes, welcome, Jane. Really great to have you with us today. We'll hand over to you for your contribution to this morning's event.
Well, thank you very much, Boroda Higid. Good morning to you all, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. Diolch am fawr am eich gwahoddiad. And actually I was quite interested immediately when I managed to just log on to hear some of that evidence coming through, because of course that was the sort of evidence that led to the setting up of Chwarae Teg all those decades ago, and shows just how much more we need to do together to address these issues. But I think, this is a really important opportunity for me as Minister for Social Justice to promote gender equality, which is so important to me, and and the whole Welsh Government. I think it's important to people of Wales. You've got such stark messages in your State of the Nation report, as you always have, and this is where it's a crucial time, and it's good it's hitting the headlines as well. We need that evidence and that analysis, which is very focused. It does help us build a clear picture of what still needs to be done. I am pleased that we've been able to, as a Welsh Government, provide the funding in all funding in all of the areas that you're covering, and policy focus and profile. And we particularly now entering to this very difficult time, post-pandemic, cost of living crisis. Your evidence coming forward is so important to us. And I just say, and I will be saying a few words about that it is, as we saw during the pandemic, those who are most vulnerable, who suffer the most inequality, who will bear and are bearing the effects of the challenges. The pandemic, and you provided that evidence, and now the cost of living crisis. And many women will be in this position both at home and in the workplace, and women with multiple intersecting protected characteristics will often fare even less well. So in such uncertain times, we need to ensure that we're taking the right steps to support those who need it most. And the State of the Nation report has taken on what I would regard a role as a crucial evidence, a critical friend role, a crucial tool for policymakers in Wales. And I think, this does reflect the need for all policymakers to respond to the State of the Nation report at every level of government and in every sector. Inflation has eroded our Welsh budget to worryingly low levels, and the UK government has failed to address the significant funding gap. And in addition, Brexit has resulted in a 1.1 billion loss, as you so well know, in unreplaced EU funds for Wales. So that's cost jobs, vital investment to help drive our economy, including such successful projects such as Nation 2. And against this backdrop, as a government, we've sought to work to ensure that we can maximise the impact of what we've got, what our resources are, and the powers that we've got. And we've done this through balancing the short-term needs associated with the ongoing cost of living crisis, but also continuing to make longer-term change and deliver on our programme for government ambitions. But they're not just ambitions, they're commitments. When it's in the programme for government, it's the commitment for the Welsh Government to deliver on those commitments. I'm pleased that the report recognises the importance of the work we're doing on gender budgeting, and through the creation of our race, equality, race and disability evidence units. I think that's where I believe we can drive forward changes in the way that we work. Just a few words on gender budgeting. As you will know, of course, gender budgeting is a key tool in ensuring that our budget and tax processes fully consider the needs of all genders and address the economic vulnerabilities of women. Embedding this approach is more than considering process changes. It does require a cultural shift in the way all areas of Welsh Government consider impact. And there are 3 gender budgeting pilots underway: the personal learning accounts, the young person's guarantee, and eMove. And they're all helping to identify how this work can be further embedded and expanded. And it's good, of course, that there's shared responsibility here across government, the finance and local government minister, the economy minister, particularly the education minister, as well as myself. We've established the Equality, Race and Disability Evidence Unit to improve the availability and quality, as well as accessibility of evidence about individuals with protected and associated characteristics. And the works of this unit will help us fully understand the level and types of inequalities across Wales and how people experience them. It will enable us to develop better informed policies and to assess and measure their impact. But we continue to tackle some of the more worrying findings of the State of the Nation report, particularly around poverty, abuse and harassment. The cost of living crisis and poverty is, of course, one of the greatest challenges we face. The TUC says that 1 in 7 people are skipping meals or going without food, and Trussell Trust figures show 1 in 5 referrals to its centres are from households where someone works. Now, we formed a cabinet subcommittee to bring together people with lived experience, expert service providers, local government, all those who have power and responsibility as well, but those who are helping people directly struggling financially, so they can speak directly with ministers. Cabinet subcommittee is for all ministers, chaired by the First Minister. So there's no more powerful evidence that comes to us at that subcommittee, and we meet again this afternoon. By reviewing and reprioritising our budgets, we've been able to invest in a range of measures to help provide targeted and short-term help to maintain or support income and avoid more people being driven into poverty during this crisis. And these measures include prioritising support for the Discretionary Assistance Fund, the Pupil Development Grant, and homelessness provision. And we know that much of our support will benefit everyone, but there are areas where women are disproportionately affected. So the gains of any additional support we can provide in these areas will mainly impact and accrue to women. Examples of the actions we continue to take, including provide support to parents with the cost of the school day and significantly increasing eligibility for free school meals. We're providing additional funding to tackle food poverty. The Period Dignity Grant was increased to ensure that free period products are available as widely as possible, as well as in all schools and colleges. We provided support for household costs, including council tax, heating support, and support for those on prepayment meters. And of course, you know, all the evidence that's coming out just over the last few weeks about the appalling inequity that people face who are on prepayment meters, addressing this as we can with the support we can provide. So these are just some of the steps we're taking to tackle the crisis, alongside those other programmes for government commitments which are so important, such as the childcare offer, the real living wage for social care workers, of course, the vast majority of whom are women, helping us to tackle those deep-rooted inequalities faced by women, as well as supporting them through the cost of living crisis. Childcare remains at the heart of our work to advance gender equality. Access to affordable and flexible childcare is an important part of supporting parents, particularly mothers, to overcome one of the main barriers that prevents them from working or progressing further in their careers. Always Chwarateg's strong message to us over so many years. We've extended the Chwarateg, the childcare offer to parents in education and training, and in September we begin the expansion of our Flying Start programme for all 2-year-olds in Wales. And rising living costs and pay disparity in the social care sector mean that pay and conditions are accepted as significant factors in recruitment and retention. A further £70 million of funding has been made available to the local authorities and health boards to continue to deliver our commitment to the real living wage to social care workers in Wales. And while the uplift alone will not address all the challenges, it will contribute to the longer term ambition to raise the profile of the sector as a professional place to work and enhance opportunities for individuals to progress their careers. Alongside that, of course, is all the work that we're doing in this realm of importance in terms of opportunities in the childcare sector. I think it's really important to say that we're moving forward in many of these initiatives as a result and in collaboration with our partners in the cooperation agreement, Plaid Cymru, which of course has enabled us to start the rollout of free school meals in primary schools. And also the Education Minister is highlighting the importance of our free breakfast scheme, which I've always felt was really important in terms of supporting families, parents and the start for children of the school day with a healthy breakfast. I'm very mindful also that the cost of living crisis is exacerbating the abuse experienced by victims and survivors. Today marks the start of the Sexual Violence Awareness Week in Wales. We are well, it's across the board, not just in Wales, but we are here in our nation recognising that too many women and girls still experience sexual violence and domestic abuse. And whilst we know violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence is not exclusively committed by men against women, male violence does define this behaviour. And only by properly addressing the power and control dynamic created by gender inequality will we see real positive change. Our new National Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence strategy includes a focus on violence against women in the street and in the workplace, as well as the home, in order to continue to make Wales the safest place in Europe to be a woman. But we all know so much, how much more we've got to do in terms of making this a reality. We fund regional advisors and specialist services to provide invaluable and life-saving support to all victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. No matter where the victim lives in Wales, there is strong public and specialist service and support ready to help. And I've also recently agreed funding to develop and deliver Pan-Wales bystander intervention training, which will be delivered to all citizens of Wales. And this initiative will be a key tool in our commitment to early intervention and prevention of sexual violence and domestic abuse. It will support our aim to change attitudes and tackle gender norms, creating a culture change that will further promote the unacceptability of all forms of violence against women and girls. Tackling gender-based violence and misogyny and attitudes that lie behind it is how we will break the cycle and address the root causes of violence against women and girls. It's not for women to modify their behaviour, it's for abusers to change theirs. Recent events have been troubling. The importance of police conduct has been highlighted by the shocking case of former Met police officer David Carrick. And although policing is the responsibility of the UK government, this is an issue we take very seriously. Working with the police in Wales, it's vital for police staff across England and Wales to demonstrate the integrity and values the public expect from them. And just last week, the Welsh Rugby Union faced up to allegations of the culture of sexism and misogyny. There's no space for sexism, misogyny, homophobia, racism, or any other form of misconduct. And I will call it out at every opportunity, and I know you will too. By raising children and young people's awareness of equality, respect and consent, we can challenge attitudes and change behaviours before harm is caused. In fact, our new curriculum, I think, is really going to pave the way. Welsh Women's Aid had a strong role in chwarae teg in helping us move that forward in terms of those key themes. But we must unite for change, and we must unite to allow everyone to live fear-free. As this report makes clear, no single actor, no single policy, no single idea will address the root causes of inequality, and there must be collective responsibility in how we rethink our society, how we want to live following this crisis, and how we prioritise the creation of broader opportunity and equality of outcome. It's crucial that all players stand ready to work in partnership to turn the dial and make real, meaningful and swift progress to achieve the change we all want to see, a gender equal Wales. And we can only do that with our partners. I've mentioned Welsh Women's Aid, BAWZO, Women's Equality Network, all of you playing such a key role. And chwarae teg is vital in terms of the state of the nation today and bringing everyone, so many together for this webinar. I'm committed, and Welsh Government is committed now more than ever to advance gender equality in Wales and all equality. We want to ensure there's no erosion of rights in Wales, and we'll work with you to achieve this. So thank you for shining a spotlight on important issues. It's not just for today, and I'll be sharing this State of the Nation report with all my colleagues in the government, just to update them as you have today with the State of the Nation report, so that we can continue to show our commitment and to work hard to address these issues in government and at every level in Wales. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks very much, Jane. Really appreciate you joining us today and for your contribution. Great to sort of get that sort of overview of what's happening across government, and to hear that that the report will be shared with cabinet colleagues. Thanks very much. So at this point, I will ask Hade to rejoin and to continue with the presentation of some of the key findings from the report.
Yes, sure. I'm gonna share my screen again. I hope you can see it okay. I was just presenting the economic inactivity and gave some reasons why we are looking at the economic inactivity rates in our report. Looking to the employment rates follow a similar pattern to economic activity since 2018. The impact of the pandemic in 2021 is clear, and while women's employment rate has increased slightly since 2018, a gender gap remains of around 6.7 percentage points. And we also look at working patterns of men and women in our reports. This is another indicator we looked at across the economic analysis. Part-time work remains a significant factor of women's working lifestyle. Since 2018, we see that there's a 3% drop in the proportion of women working part-time. But there's little change in the men's rate of part-time work over the years, with stable around 12 percentage points. So we can see from the graphics that the gender difference in working patterns is quite clear. Given that part-time work tends to more frequently be offered available for lower paid roles, this gender gap is an important factor in the pay inequality we continue to see in our economy. So there is still a job to be done around part-time work. The second section of our report is women represented. We look at women represented in public and economic life in our reports because women's representation matters. Having diverse voices in the room ensures that different issues and different perspectives are discussed. This diversity is vitally important in public life, where decisions that affect our day-to-day lives are taken. Since 2018, we've seen that the proportion of women of Welsh MPs and women councillors increased up to 35% and 36% respectively. This is a welcome progress, but there remains work to do to reach gender balance in these areas. Unfortunately, in Senate, we have seen the proportion of women MSs decrease slightly from 47% in 2018 to 43% in 2022. So we need to be vigilant in the women representation in public life. On public appointments, from the data available, we can see that the proportion of women appointed has hit at least 50%. Unfortunately, with the data currently available, we are not able to look at these figures from an intersectional perspective. Going forward, we will be recommending that Welsh Government gather and publish data to enable this analysis and better understand how much progress we are making to diversify public appointments. There's a big commitment, as the minister said, there's a big commitment from Welsh Government to diversify the public appointments, but at the moment it's very difficult for an external organization like us to really see what's happening beyond sort of some headlines figures around gender. But as Minister mentioned, there's a huge commitment from the Welsh Government to collect equality and diversity data in our public lives as well. And we know that women are also underrepresented across some sectors and occupations. Women account for less than 40% of those employed as managers, directors, and senior officials, even though there is an equal representation in the professional levels. They're also underrepresented among business leaders, with 14% of SMEs in Wales wholly led by women. This lags slightly behind the UK figures, although at 16%, this figure is also quite low. This figure shows us that there is still a glass ceiling for women to be represented in the senior levels in Wales and across the UK. Women at risk is the third and the final section of our report, and it's safe to say that this section where the figures are most stark and where the lack of progress is most evident. Women remain at far greater risk of violence, and specialist services remain under so much pressure in this space. Alongside the stark figures, accessing the data is a challenge about women at risk. With limited regularity produced data sets and that tell us the full picture, we are struggling to get the full pictures from the data. Using crime data alone is not sufficient, as they do not give the full picture of the risks, as many cases are still underreported. And too often we then have to rely on data collected and published by the specialist services that are under immense pressure trying to meet the needs of women they support. So this section of State of the Nation is different to other parts of the report, as we present the most up-to-date data that we can find from reliable sources to demonstrate the scale of challenge we face. And in terms of safety, figures from 2022 show that women are still less likely to feel safe in their local area or on public transport after dark. Looking across the past 5 years, we actually see a worsening pictures in this space. In 2018 to 2019, just 58% of women stated they felt safe. This has dropped to 42% in 2021-2022, and we also see a marked difference to men's responses, where over 80% state they feel safe. The figures clearly shows that feeling of safety for women is not improving, and unfortunately going to a wrong direction. Women also continue to face greater risks of sexual violence. The latest data from Rape Crisis England and Wales shows that 1 in 4 women have been raped or sexually assaulted as an adult. 5 in 6 women who are raped do not report it to police. Only 1 in 100 rapes recorded by police resulted in a charge in the year ending March 2022. Sexual harassment remains a feature of many women's lives. 50% of women aged 16 to 34 reported experiencing at least one form of sexual harassment in the past year. 38% reported catcalls, whistles, and unwanted sexual comments or jokes from a stranger. Women at risk section of the report also includes poverty data, because we know that women are at risk of poverty, at greater risk of poverty, as well as experiencing different risks and impacts of poverty. This is a situation that could worsen as the cost of living crisis continues to bite. Like in the other parts of the women at risk section, data remains a challenge in this space. One of the biggest challenge in data is that poverty is measured at a household level, which leaves us to make assumptions about how resources are shared within households, who is the household head of the households, and so on. As such, the full extent of women's poverty is likely to be hidden. And these data challenges have been made more acute this year due to the impact of the pandemic on the data collection process. Updated figures of 2021 have not been produced, and there are therefore we have including the data from the last year's State of the Nation. So these figures do not reflect the impact of the cost of living crisis and the further economic difficulties that that people are experiencing at the moment. And this this data shows that female-headed households are more likely to be in poverty, and the group at higher risks are single parents, and we know that the majority of whom are women. We also touch base on social security system in our State of the Nation report in relation to poverty as well as employment. Universal credit is the main source of support in the system and has long been criticized for its failure to meet women's needs. This become much more problematic given that 57% of universal credit claimants are in Wales are women. And it's important to note that universal credit is not just an out-of-work benefit, and women are likely than men to be employed in employment and claiming universal credit. 43% of women universal credit claimants are in work compared to 33% of men. And this undoubtedly linked to the fact that women are less likely to be working in higher paid jobs and more likely to be working fewer hours. So this will be the headline figures of State of the Nation reports, and I'm now gonna give the word to Tash to round up the key messages and our recommendations, but we'll be back for your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Hadi.
Sorry.
If you could keep sharing. Fab, and click on to the next slide for me. Thank you very much. Yes, so that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the headline figures from the State of the Nation reports. What can we conclude from the two reports that we've published this year? Well, firstly, at the current pace of change, women will be waiting decades for equality. For the most marginalised women, that wait will be even longer. The inequality that the reports highlight does come at a cost. It is precisely the inequality highlighted in the State of the Nation reports that are leaving women more vulnerable to the negative impacts of successive crises. We saw it in the wake of the 2008 financial crash. We saw it during the pandemic, and we're seeing it again now during the cost of living crisis. We simply have to quicken the pace of change. Now, as the Minister said herself, no single actor is going to be able to address the many complex, interrelated issues that are producing this inequality. We are clear that we need to make this a truly national mission, with government, business, and individuals are all playing an active role in tackling inequality. This is not the first time that we've made this argument, but we will keep saying it until we see change happen. And what change do we need to see? What do we think the solutions are? Well, firstly, we need to make better decisions and better policy that takes proper account of the needs of diverse women across Wales, changing both what we do and how we do it. That's a message that some of you will undoubtedly have heard us say before. It's a message we've been putting out there since we completed work on the Gender Equality Review back in 2019. Now, we do have some good foundations on which to speed up the pace of change here. The Minister's already referenced a number of these actions that have been taken. We saw the creation of the 3 equality data units within government. We've seen pilots of gender budgeting. We've also seen a pilot of equalities mainstreaming policy development. There's a much greater focus from government on drawing on lived experience. And I think there has been a marked increase in the focus on taking an intersectional approach. All of this is positive. But we want to see the implementation of the wider recommendations from the Gender Equality Review happening a little more quickly, looking at investing in upskilling and training for officials, increasing the capacity for equality across all government departments, putting those pilots of gender budgeting and mainstreaming within a proper cross-governmental mainstreaming strategy or framework, and looking beyond just Welsh Government. We need to look at how local government and the wider public sector can also be supported to adopt these ways of working. In terms of policy areas, there is absolutely a need for action across the breadth of government, but there are 2 issues that remain especially critical if we're going to achieve gender equality. That's the issue of childcare and unpaid work, and sexual harassment, abuse and violence. We as an organisation have been saying for a long time, along with sister organisations, that our long-term goal has to be to provide universal free provision. We've seen some steps in the right direction, the expansion of the 30 hours offer to those who are in education and training, the planned rollout of Flying Start to parents of 2-year-olds, but we need to go further and faster. We'll also be closely watching what UK political parties say about childcare as they move on to a pre-election footing, and we will continue to call on Welsh Government to do what they can to expand provision in Wales as quickly as possible. In terms of sexual harassment, we know that many specialist services working with survivors are under immense pressure, so we echo calls for a proper shift to sustainable multi-year funding for these vital services. Now, as Hade highlighted, there are some figures around this issue that are going in the wrong direction, especially not least for women's safety in public spaces. That's why we are currently running a campaign that calls on local government leaders to adopt an approach to planning that focuses on safety and inclusion. We have a petition live and would ask you to consider signing it and also consider getting in touch with the local councillors to raise the issue. Now, it's not just government that can and should take action. Businesses are also going to need to consider how they can better organise work to support those with caring responsibilities and consider what policies and practice are needed to eradicate workplace harassment. We need to be embracing new opportunities posed by new tech that change how and where people can work, but we need to make sure that equality, diversity, inclusion are at the centre of any change that is implemented. And as the Minister referenced herself, we've seen in just the past few weeks how deep-rooted issues of harassment and abuse can be within organisations and the impact that this can have on women that work there. It's time for a truly zero tolerance approach and a focus on driving the cultural change that is needed so that women in any workplace feel safe. And if they have to report any issues, they know that they will be believed, treated with respect, and can expect action to be taken. And of course, there's a role for civil society and organisations like ourselves. We're going to need to think about how we can work together in an increasingly challenging funding and political climate so that we can effectively support marginalised groups and campaign for change. That's no small challenge as capacity is stretched further, but it will be essential. So to round up our contribution before we move to questions, in Wales, there is undoubtedly a strong commitment to equality and social justice, but with little change against some of the key measures for gender equality that we set out in the State of the Nation reports, the challenge for us all remains how we change those warm words into action, and crucially into action that makes a meaningful difference to women's lives. So at this point, we'll stop sharing the screen so you can see both myself and Hade, and we will invite our colleague Thomas to the floor, who will be taking some questions from the Q&A for Hade and I to answer.
Hello, both. Good morning. We've had a couple of questions in, but I thought I would take kind of, I guess, chair's privilege. Obviously, I'm part of the team that's been working on this, but I'm just interested to know what you two found to be some of the more stark results and findings out of the State of the Nation reports, especially in the context that we pulled together a 5-year review. Is there anything that was particularly shocking or exciting or disappointing?
Yeah, so not necessarily surprising, but certainly I think what struck me the most when we were putting the report together, and actually what struck me again when Hade was presenting the findings there, is the data around safety and the fact that so many women still do not feel safe just going about their day-to-day lives, and the fact that that's moving in the wrong direction. I think that's very concerning. It's not surprising given the issues we've seen emerge over the last couple of years, the high-profile cases we've had. But it's very, very concerning that that's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is one of the most stark parts of the report, really. So we can't really see the positives in that part of the report because we don't have the data, and still the headline figures are still giving a grim picture. So that's one of the most stark part of the report for me as well, as I said. But also one of the biggest change we saw in the 5-year report is the women from ethnic minority background are looking to go to employment. So the employment rate is quite high for them, which means that economic inactivity levels are dropping and they're looking for more work. So there's a mobility in the labor market in terms of the participation of ethnic minority women into the labor force. So we need to be aware of that change in the 5-year terms. I think the fluctuation is giving us signals that we need to work on that area.
So there's a question here from Carolyn. Now it's more focused at Welsh Government, but it is to do with kind of the Safe and Inclusive Spaces campaign and the petition that's happening. Why, just kind of maybe add some more context to that. Why is that something that we've been looking at moving forward with recently? How is that related to what we've published today?
So yeah, I think it's related to a few things. Obviously, in terms of safety, a big question mark is, well, are the spaces in which we're going about our day-to-day lives, are they being designed in a way that prioritizes women's safety? Decisions about whether or not to leave streetlights on, for example, decisions about walking routes, public transport links, how late said public transport links run. All of those decisions, the decisions about sort of physical space, have perhaps the biggest impact on how we go about our lives, and not just in terms of safety either. Are we designing our public transport system in a way that actually supports people who aren't just doing a simple commute from A to B? The answer is 9 times out of 10, no, we're not. We're planning transport around quite traditional commuter patterns, which have never really worked well for women, and don't take account of the unpaid work that women are often doing in terms of taking the kids to school, picking up the prescriptions from the doctor, and like all that kind of stuff. So it's a topic we've wanted to get involved in for a long time. Hade is particularly passionate about this topic, so I'll let her pick this up in just a second. But I think sort of we just wanted to do some work that recognised that there's a really important role for local government to be playing in this space, given they are making decisions about their local area all the time.
Thanks, Tash. Yeah, I mean, I think you framed it really very nicely there. But the problem is that we never organize our cities, our towns, according to the needs of women. There's always a kind of how we is very similar to how we structure the work in the workplace, and why we are giving this importance to gender equality in workplace. We need to give the same actions in our cities, organization of our cities, because all the structure is organized according to the needs of a certain group, which is predominantly the men. And in this structure, there's no consideration of women, their different responsibilities to men, and gender norms or disability and so on. So we need to make our living spaces more equal and accessible for all. And one of them is, the burning point is the safety in public spaces. So we start from the safety issue, but there's lots of work to be done in the organization of our cities and our workplaces.
Thank you. We'll go to Neve's question next. So Neve's asked about what the statistics in the reports tell us about Wales compared to the rest of the UK. Now, I know we don't necessarily have all those benchmarks within the report, but is there any kind of light that you can shed on that for us, please?
Yeah, I'll make a start, and I'm sure Hade is into the data in a greater extent than me, so may have something to add. So what I'd say, so on pay, we see that the gender pay gap in Wales is lower. That's not necessarily, I mean, it's good that the pay gap is smaller, but it's probably partly linked to the fact that rates of pay generally are higher for the UK, because you've got those high rates of pay of the Southeast, and particularly for men in that part. So that kind of sort of has an impact on the pay inequality. In many respects, we share many similar issues. There aren't any real significant areas where it's like, oh God, Wales has got a real particular challenge, aside from, I would say, around general rates of poverty. Poverty is a particularly persistent issue for Wales, like in overall, and obviously then that also then translates into the higher risk of poverty for women as well. And I think that's something that we haven't really gotten to grips with. And in that context and the cost of living context, the lack of a truly sort of cross-governmental tackling poverty strategy leaves me a little uneasy, because I think it's very difficult to see exactly what is being done to reduce levels of poverty and to measure how effective those interventions are.
Yeah, again, completely agree what Tash says, and the figures in Wales are more volatile. I can add to that. The fluctuations we see in the Welsh economy is more than the UK economy, because the precarious working or the impact of different policies in Wales is different to the UK level. So we see the fluctuations more stark in Wales. But also, I think, the factors like Brexit is going to have a different impact on Wales than the UK. We will see these impacts, these big policy changes and the income changes in Welsh economy more in the coming years, because Wales was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the European funds, for example. So the lack of that kind of funding from Welsh economy is going to have a bigger impact, and we see more kind of a volatile economy in the future. Just want to highlight that in the women at risk section, especially about the sexual harassment and sexual abuse data, we try to find Welsh desegregated data, but the crime statistics are for England and Wales. So it also includes the English case in some of the English case in our data. So that is more like a similar pattern, but we don't have much of the Welsh desegregated data in that section. Just wanted to highlight that one for closing. Thanks.
Thank you, Hade. Well, actually, that leads on kind of nicely to a question here from Emma about what needs to be done around improving the availability of gender disaggregated data, but also specifically as it relates to poverty.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not necessarily an easy or straightforward one to answer either. I think having the reason given often for the lack of disaggregated Welsh specific data anyway is that it's very expensive to have the boosts required to the surveys to get the Welsh sample. That being said, I think there are some key issues where we really do need to be properly understanding what's happening in Wales, particularly in areas where we have a different policy focus, a different legislative framework potentially. So I think prioritizing those areas would be important so that we can understand whether or not Welsh interventions are having an impact. Crucially around poverty, it's finding ways to look beyond the household measure. That's the fundamental problem. And it might be the case that we need to look at using a suite of data rather than just relying on any one individual headline figure. So there are some data sets around poverty that can be broken down by gender, using those perhaps alongside. And I think our steer is always the stats will only take you so far, and actually what we need to be doing if we're going to have evidence-led policy making, we need to be looking at the value of qualitative evidence and lived experience as well, particularly in the areas where we know there are problems with the statistical data. And I think that's where the role of the equality data units within Welsh Government are going to be really, really important. I know they've got a programme of work that's been published so people can have a look at what they're up to. And I think that needs to be a real focus, I think, for those parts, for those units to think about how data and evidence can actually genuinely paint a true picture or truer picture of what's going on, so we can properly have evidence-led policy making.
Yeah, and also collecting the data in the household level is a big problem, because we don't know the household settings, and we don't know how the resources are shared in the household. But also poverty is a very challenging and very diversified topic. Like Tess said, it is experienced differently by different people in different regions and in different settings. So we need to look beyond the general figures of income levels and so on. So we have fuel poverty, food poverty, and other kind of access to services poverty. The poverty can have different indicators and variables. So how people are accessing the public services, for example, in living in different parts of Wales, this can be also counted as a poverty issue. So we need to just diversify how we are looking to the indicators of poverty, and also looking from a gender perspective, because men and women are using services in different ways and they experience poverty in different ways. So I think it's more important, it's really important to look at different figures and how people experience these issues in their lives.
Thank you, Hadi. I think we've got time for probably one more question. So we'll go to this one who's not given their name, but they've asked about kind of a changed culture. You know, they've mentioned that we seem to be very much in the same place for the past decade when it comes to gender equality, that the same issues are coming up again and again. What needs to happen in order to kind of change that culture, if it's not just a case of finance or legislation, to really kind of put the boosters under making us a gender equal nation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. With no easy answer, I don't think. I mean, obviously, there's a really important role for leadership from, you know, sort of anybody really with the power to drive change. Yes, there is definitely a role for government, Welsh government, UK government, but also local government. I think in terms of sort of government approach, it will take resourcing ultimately, so that, you know, it is to a certain extent a bit of a financial question, because it can't just be about changes to processes. We genuinely need to change how we're developing policies and programs and delivering government interventions to a point where equality genuinely is embedded from the outset. That's not an easy thing to do, but it does need to happen. And I do feel like we've made a bit more progress in the last couple of years around that. And I was certainly reassured to hear the minister saying that it does need to be about more than process change, which I think she said when she was talking about the gender budgeting pilots. I think there is a broader question around sort of a societal shift. And I think what leaves me concerned is that in some ways, I think we're going in the wrong direction with some of this stuff. I think misogyny is actually worsening, particularly across social media. If we look at the case of Andrew Tate, for example. So I think, you know, there's a job to be done really to not just make sure that we're making progress, but that we're not rolling backwards. And that's going to require proper sort of collective focus really from all governments, from all political parties, from anybody sort of in that sort of leading position. And that's where I think we need to see sort of, you know, UK government as well, sort of in step with sort of where we need to be on some of this stuff, not perhaps excusing some behaviour, which I think does happen at times.
Yeah, I mean, cultural change is a big topic, of course. You know, there's no single answer, but as you mentioned in our report and Tash underlined, gender mainstreaming is so important, and recognition of the different experiences of men and women, the different ways of, you know, working patterns or accessing the services are so important to actually reflecting into the policy framework. So gender mainstreaming, gender budgeting, these are the steps that the governments can take. And Coratec prepared gender equality review about how governments can move forward in gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting. So we're asking for the governments to take these recommendations on board. And I think yeah, we all have roles, I think, in this to achieve cultural change. We need to care each other. We need to care, you know, how we are organizing our lives, and how we are caring for each other and providing safe spaces for women and other groups that are marginalized in our cultural life. And yeah, we all have roles, but there are also lots of things that the governments can do.
Brilliant. So conscious of the time, so we will can't take any more questions at this point, but any questions that we've missed, we will try and answer somewhere, but I'll work with the team to see whether or not we can send those directly to people, or whether we can send it as part of any sort of post-event email to all attendees. So in which case, it's just me really to thank you all for joining us. Massive thanks to the Minister and to Hade for joining me as speakers today, and to Thomas and the rest of the team for doing all of the behind the scenes stuff that allows us to run events as hopefully smoothly as today has gone. We will be dropping a couple of links into the chat now. We are putting links in to a quality, diversity, inclusion monitoring form. If you don't mind completing that, it's very, very helpful for us, so we can understand who it is that are engaging with us at the moment. And if we are not reaching everybody we need to reach, that can help inform what we do next to ensure that we reach as many as people as possible. We've got a number of other events happening for the rest of this week. There is a webinar tomorrow looking at the cost of living crisis. We're going to be joined by Luke Young from Citizens Advice to look at what the gendered impacts of the crisis are in Wales to date. And then on Thursday, we have a session, a bit of an introduction to gender budgeting. We'll be providing some information about gender budgeting around the world, and also running a bit of an interactive session to apply some of the tools and approaches. We will also be sharing stuff across our social media channels for the rest of this week. State of the Nation is not a one-day thing, so please help us share the information, engage across our social media channels, retweet, etc. Yeah, and I think that's everything I need to cover. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your company.